The security camera footage would later show exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. That's how long it took for Karen Whitmore to realize the pool gate had clicked shut behind her, trapping her in David Chen's backyard like a caged animal. What the camera couldn't capture was the moment her entitled smirk melted into pure terror when she heard the sirens in the distance, or the delicious irony that her own illegal trespassing would finally give David the ammunition he needed to destroy her. After 18 months of harassment, vandalism, and threats, Karen had finally walked into the perfect trap, one she'd built entirely herself. David Chen pressed his face against the cool glass of his kitchen window, watching in disbelief as his neighbor Karen Whitmore stood waist-deep in his pool at 2:47 a.m., her bleach blonde hair floating around her like seaweed. She held a wine glass above the water, laughing at something on her phone while his expensive LED pool lights illuminated her pale skin with an ethereal blue glow. "Not again," he whispered, his breath fogging the window. This was the fourth time in 3 weeks. The fourth time Karen had somehow gotten through his locked gate and helped herself to his pool like it was her personal resort. David's hands trembled as he reached for his phone, muscle memory guiding him to the familiar contact, Riverside Police Department. 911, what's your emergency? This is David Chen at 847 Maple Grove Drive. My neighbor has broken into my backyard again and she's in my pool. I need officers dispatched for trespassing. The operator's voice carried the weary tone of someone who'd heard this exact scenario too many times. Sir, is this related to the ongoing neighbor dispute we have on file? David closed his eyes. Of course they had it on file. 18 months of complaints, incident reports, and documented harassment had created a paper trail thick enough to choke on. Yes, it's Karen Whitmore from 849 Maple Grove. She's trespassing on my property. Officers are en route. Do not confront the individual. Stay inside your residence. David ended the call and watched Karen take a leisurely backstroke across his pool. The audacity was breathtaking. She wasn't even trying to hide anymore. In the early days of their conflict, she'd at least had the decency to sneak around in the dead of night. Now she treated his backyard like her personal kingdom. It had started so innocuously. Karen and her husband Brad had moved in next door 18 months ago, and David had actually been hopeful about having new neighbors. His previous neighbors, the Johnsons, had been quiet retirees who kept to themselves and maintained their property beautifully. When the sold sign went up, David had even baked cookies as a welcome gesture. He should have seen the warning signs immediately. Karen had answered the door in a bathrobe at 3 p.m., her eyes bloodshot and her breath reeking of wine. She'd snatched the cookies with barely a thank you and launched into a 20-minute monologue about how the previous owners had let the neighborhood go to hell and how she intended to bring some class back to the street. The first incident happened 3 weeks later. David had come home from his job at the software company to find Karen in his backyard, pruning his rose bushes with a pair of industrial hedge trimmers. "Karen, what are you doing?" he'd asked, trying to keep his voice level. She'd looked up. With that smile, the one he'd come to know so well. It was part condescension, part entitlement, and entirely infuriating. "Oh, hi David. I was just cleaning up these roses. They were growing over the fence into my yard, dropping petals all over my patio. I figured I'd save you the trouble." David had stared at his demolished rose bushes, plants he'd spent 3 years nurturing, and felt something cold settle in his stomach. Those roses weren't growing over the fence. And even if they were, you can't just come onto my property. And actually, I can, Karen had interrupted, her voice taking on a lecturing tone. Property rights extend to overhanging branches and roots that cross property lines. I'm well within my legal rights to trim anything that encroaches on my space. She wasn't entirely wrong, but she wasn't right either. And the roses definitely hadn't been growing over the fence. David had measured twice. That night, he'd researched property law until 2 a.m. and discovered that while Karen had some rights regarding overhanging vegetation, those rights didn't include trespassing on his property to address the issue. She should have trimmed from her side of the fence or asked permission to access his yard. The next morning, David had approached her diplomatically. Karen, about yesterday, I understand your concerns about the roses, but I'd appreciate it if you'd asked before coming into my yard. Maybe we can work together to find solutions that work for both of us. Karen's response had been swift and brutal. Listen, David, I don't know how things worked with your previous neighbors, but I'm not going to tippy-toe around every little thing. If your plants are affecting my property, I'm going to deal with it. That's what responsible neighbors do. The word responsible had hit like a slap. David kept his yard immaculate. He'd won the neighborhood's Best Landscaping Award 2 years running. His house was painted, his driveway sealed, his garbage can stored out of sight. If anyone was the responsible neighbor, it was him. But Karen was just getting started. The pool incidents began 6 months later. David had installed the pool the previous summer, a modest above-ground setup that he'd positioned carefully to comply with all city ordinances and HOA regulations. He'd even had it professionally surveyed to ensure it wasn't too close to any property lines. Karen had appeared at his door the day after installation, her face flushed with indignation. That pool is completely unacceptable. I'm sorry. The noise, David. The filter runs all night. It's keeping Brad and me awake. David had blinked in confusion. The filter is virtually silent. The manufacturer specifically advertised it as whisper quiet. Well, it's not quiet enough. You need to move it or get rid of it. Karen, I can't move it. It's positioned exactly where the city approved it. And I certainly can't get rid of it, I just had it installed. Her eyes had narrowed to slits. We'll see about that. The first time she'd used his pool without permission, David had assumed it was a misunderstanding. He'd come home to find her floating on an inflatable unicorn, a margarita in her hand and her phone playing music through a Bluetooth speaker. Karen. What are you doing in my pool? She'd looked genuinely surprised by his question. Oh. I figured it would be okay since you weren't home. Brad and I were having a little pool party and your pool is so much nicer than the community one. But it's my pool. You can't just use it without asking. David, don't be ridiculous. We're neighbors. Neighbors share things. That had been the beginning of David's education in Karen logic, a twisted form of reasoning where her desires automatically trumped everyone else's rights, where her convenience justified any inconvenience. She caused others, and where questioning her behavior made you the unreasonable one. When David had installed a lock on the pool gate, Karen had somehow obtained bolt cutters. When he'd upgraded to a digital keypad lock, she'd figured out the code by watching him from her bedroom window. When he changed the code and repositioned himself to block her view, she'd started climbing over the fence. The police had been less than helpful. Officer Martinez, who seemed to draw the short straw on all their domestic disputes, had grown visibly tired of the back and forth. Look, Mr. Chen, Officer Martinez had said after the third incident, unless you want to press charges, there's not much we can do. She leaves when we ask her to, she doesn't damage anything, and technically, the pool is visible from her property, so she can argue she thought she had permission. But she doesn't have permission. I've told her explicitly that she doesn't have permission. Do you have that in writing? David hadn't. All their conversations had been verbal, and Karen had a remarkable ability to reinterpret those conversations in ways that favored her position. The situation had escalated 3 months ago when David had finally snapped. He'd come home from a particularly brutal day at work, 12 hours debugging code that someone else had broken, to find Karen hosting what appeared to be a full pool party. 8 people were crammed into his modest pool, music was blasting. And empty beer bottles lined his deck. What the hell is this? David had shouted, storming across his yard. The party had gone silent. Karen had emerged from the pool like some kind of suburban sea goddess, her face a mask of wounded innocence. David, there's no need to shout. We are just enjoying the evening. Get out. Get out of my pool right now. Look, I understand you're upset, but I'm not upset, I'm furious. This is my property. My pool. You can't just invite people over to use my stuff. Karen's expression had shifted then, the mask slipping to reveal something cold and calculating underneath. I think you need to calm down, David. You're being very aggressive and you're frightening my guests. The accusation had hit him like ice water. Aggressive? Him? He was the victim here. But looking around at the faces staring at him, Karen's friends and neighbors who only knew her version of events, David had realized how he must look. A man screaming at a woman and her friends. The angry neighbor who couldn't share. He'd forced himself to lower his voice. Please leave my property. All of you. Now. Karen had smiled then, that same condescending smile from their first meeting. Oh. Karen Whitmore had always prided herself on her situational awareness. As a former real estate agent and current president of the Maple Grove Homeowners Association, she'd learned to read people, to anticipate their moves, to stay 3 steps ahead of whatever petty drama might threaten her carefully constructed world. So when she heard the distant wail of sirens cutting through the pre-dawn silence, her first instinct wasn't alarm, it was annoyance. Some inconsiderate neighbor was having a medical emergency or domestic dispute, and the noise was going to wake up the entire street. She'd have to address it at the next HOA meeting. Karen took another sip of her wine, a lovely Pinot Grigio she'd borrowed from David's outdoor refrigerator, and checked her phone. 3:17 a.m. She'd been enjoying her swim for nearly 30 minutes, and while David's pool was smaller than she would have preferred for her own home, it was certainly adequate for her needs. The sirens grew louder, and Karen felt a flicker of irritation. Whatever emergency this was, it was heading toward Maple Grove Drive. She'd have to cut her swim short if police cars and ambulances were going to turn the street into a circus. She swam to the shallow end and stood up, water cascading from her designer one-piece swimsuit. The pool lights cast her shadow across the deck in sharp relief, and for a moment she felt like a movie star emerging from the ocean in some romantic film. Brad never appreciated these moments, her theatrical flair, her natural grace. He was too busy with his golf buddies and his precious garage workshop to notice that he'd married a woman who deserved better than suburban mediocrity. The sirens were very close now. Karen grabbed her towel from David's deck chair and wrapped it around her waist. Time to make her exit before the whole neighborhood woke up and started asking questions about why she was swimming at 3 a.m. She walked to the pool gate and pressed the handle down. Nothing. Karen frowned and tried again, pushing harder this time. The handle depressed, but the gate remained firmly closed. A cold knot formed in her stomach as she examined the locking mechanism more closely. The digital lock was still disengaged, she could see the green light indicating it was open. But there was another lock, a manual deadbolt she hadn't noticed before, and it was definitely engaged. What the hell, she muttered, running her fingers along the gate frame. This was impossible. She'd come through this gate 30 minutes ago, and there had been no manual lock then. Had David somehow? The sirens suddenly stopped, and Karen's blood turned to ice. The silence was somehow worse than the noise, pregnant with implications she didn't want to consider. She grabbed the gate and shook it violently. The entire fence rattled, but the lock held firm. Karen's breathing quickened as she looked around David's backyard for another exit. The fence was 8 feet high on all sides, topped with decorative but sharp-looking finials. She was athletic, but not athletic enough to scale that height, especially not in a wet swimsuit. David, she called out, trying to keep her voice calm and authoritative. David, there seems to be a problem with your gate. No response. The windows of his house remained dark and still. David. This time she shouted, her voice cracking with the first note of real panic. The gate is stuck. I need you to come open it. A light flickered on in David's kitchen, and Karen felt a rush of relief. He'd come out, opened the gate, and she'd slip back to her house before anyone was the wiser. This was just a minor inconvenience, not a disaster. But David didn't appear in the backyard. Instead, she heard his voice, muffled but audible through the kitchen window. Yes, Officer Martinez, she's contained in the pool area. I have video evidence of her picking the lock to gain entry. No, she can't escape. I engaged the manual lock from the outside. Absolutely, I want to press charges. Karen's knees went weak. The realization hit her like a physical blow. David had trapped her. Deliberately. Intentionally. He'd been waiting for this moment, planning for it, and she'd walked directly into his trap. "David, you bastard," she screamed, abandoning all pretense of dignity. "Let me out of here right now." The kitchen light went out. Karen ran to the fence and began shaking it with both hands, the aluminum panels rattling like thunder. "Help! Somebody help me! I'm being held against my will." Her voice echoed off the houses around her, but no lights came on, no neighbors appeared. At 3:20 a.m. on a Tuesday, Maple Grove Drive was a ghost town. The sound of car doors slamming made Karen's stomach lurch. Heavy footsteps approached the front of David's house, followed by the distinctive crackle of police radios. "Mr. Chen. This is Officer Martinez, Riverside PD." Karen heard David's front door open. "Thank you for coming, officer. I have the suspect contained in my backyard." "Suspect?" Karen shrieked. "I'm not a suspect. I'm his neighbor." Please step away from the fence," came a new voice, female, authoritative. "We need you to remain calm while we sort this out." Karen spun around to see two police officers standing at the fence gate, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Officer Martinez she recognized from their previous encounters, but the woman was new, younger, with sharp eyes that missed. "Nothing." "Officer Martinez, thank God," Karen said, forcing her voice back to its usual commanding tone. "This is all a misunderstanding. David locked me in here as some kind of sick joke. I demand that you arrest him for false imprisonment." Officer Martinez looked tired in a way that went beyond just being called out at 3 a.m. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Chen says you broke into his backyard by picking the lock on his gate. Is that accurate?" "That's ridiculous. I would never." Karen stopped herself, her mind racing. The lockpicks were still in her beach bag, sitting right there on David's deck chair. "If they searched her belongings..." The female officer said, consulting her notepad, "I'm Officer Santos. We are going to need you to step back from the gate so we can have a conversation." Karen took a few steps back, her bare feet slapping wetly on the concrete. She was acutely aware of how she must look, dripping wet, wrapped in a towel, standing in someone else's backyard at 3 a.m. "Now," Officer Santos continued, "can you explain how you gained entry to this yard?" Karen's mind cycled through possible explanations. She could claim the gate was unlocked, but what about the lockpicks? She could say David had given her permission, but there would be text messages proving otherwise. She could claim she'd climbed the fence, but that would still be trespassing. "The gate was open," she said finally. "I came over to use the pool, just like I have before. David knows I use it." Officer Martinez said with infinite patience, "Mr. Chen has repeatedly asked you not to use his pool. We have multiple incident reports documenting this. And he says he has video evidence of you picking the lock." "The video?" Karen's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd forgotten about the security cameras David had installed. In her arrogance, she'd assumed they were just for show, another one of his paranoid overreactions to their perfectly normal neighborly interactions. "I want to speak to David," she said. "Face to face. This is all just a communication breakdown." "Mr. Chen doesn't wish to speak with you," Officer Santos replied. "He's provided us with video evidence and a statement. He wants to press charges for breaking and entering, criminal trespass, and vandalism." "Vandalism? I haven't vandalized anything. He says you've damaged his lock mechanism multiple times and that you've used his pool chemicals and electricity without permission." Each charge hit Karen like a slap. She'd never thought of picking a lock as vandalism. The pool chemicals and electricity were just incidental usage. These weren't crimes, they were neighbor disputes. "This is insane," Karen said, her voice rising. "We are talking about a swimming pool, not Fort Knox. David is being completely unreasonable about this whole thing." Officer Martinez said, "Regardless of how you feel about Mr. Chen's reasonableness, you don't have the right to enter his property without permission. You especially don't have the right to pick his locks." "I never picked any lock." "That's a lie." Officer Santos played a video on her phone, angling it so Karen could see the screen. There, in grainy but unmistakable detail, was Karen herself, crouched at David's gate with a small tool in her hand, working methodically at the lock mechanism. Karen's face went numb. That video could be from any night. You can't prove when that was taken. The timestamp shows this was recorded approximately 1 hour ago. And frankly, the fact that you are currently in Mr. Chen's pool at 3:20 a.m. pretty much speaks for itself. Karen looked around desperately, as if the solution to her predicament might be hiding in the shadows. This couldn't be happening. She was Karen Whitmore, president of the HOA, wife of successful contractor Brad Whitmore, respected member of the community. She didn't get arrested. She got other people in trouble. Look, she said, trying a different approach, David and I have been having some communication issues, but this is way out of proportion. I'll pay for any damages and I promise not to use the pool anymore. Can't we just handle this between neighbors? Officer Santos exchanged a look with Officer Martinez. Karen recognized that look. She'd used it herself countless times when dealing with difficult residents who thought the rules didn't apply to them. Mrs. Whitmore, Officer Santos said gently, I understand this is embarrassing, but the time for handling this between neighbors has. The Riverside Police Department at 4:30 a.m. was a fluorescent-lit purgatory of burnt coffee and bureaucratic indifference. Karen sat in an orange plastic chair that seemed designed to inflict maximum discomfort, her wet hair dripping onto a tank top that had seemed stylish at the pool store but now felt like a neon sign advertising her poor judgment. The booking process had been a masterclass in humiliation. Fingerprints, mugshot, personal belongings inventoried with clinical detachment. The lockpicks had been photographed from multiple angles and sealed in an evidence bag while Officer Santos maintained the carefully neutral expression of someone who'd seen it all before. Mrs. Whitmore, a heavy-set detective with kind eyes and a rumpled suit, approached her holding a manila folder. I'm Detective Rodriguez. I'll be handling your case. Karen looked up hopefully. Finally, someone with authority who might understand that this was all a ridiculous misunderstanding between neighbors. Detective, thank goodness. This whole situation has gotten completely out of hand. David Chen has been harassing me for months and now he's somehow twisted everything to make me look like the criminal. Detective Rodriguez sat down across from her, opened the folder, and began reading in a voice devoid of emotion. Breaking and entering with tools. Criminal trespass. Vandalism. Harassment. He looked up at her. Mrs. Whitmore, these are serious charges. Your neighbor has provided 18 months of documentation. Documentation of what? Me using a swimming pool. Documentation of repeated trespassing, property damage, threatening behavior, and escalating criminal activity. The detective flipped through several pages. Let me read you some of the incident reports. June 15, 2023, suspect destroyed rose bushes on complainant's property without permission. August 3, 2023, suspect found using complainant's pool without permission, became verbally aggressive when confronted. Karen's mouth went dry. Those weren't criminal acts. Those were neighbor disputes. September 22, 2023, suspect cut complainant's lock with bolt cutters to gain access to pool area. October 14, 2023, suspect climbed fence to access pool. Left gate open, allowing complainant's dog to escape. Wait, that's not, I never let any dog escape. Detective Rodriguez consulted another page. Mr. Chen's incident report states that his elderly beagle, Winston, got out through the gate you left open and was nearly hit by a car on Maple Grove Drive. Karen felt the blood drain from her face. She remembered that night she'd been in a hurry to leave before David got home, and maybe she had forgotten to latch the gate properly. But she'd never known about any dog, and certainly hadn't intended. The dog is fine, Detective Rodriguez continued, but Mr. Chen had to pay $400 in emergency vet bills for a panic attack and minor injuries. $400. Karen's stomach churned as she realized that what she'd dismissed as a minor oversight had nearly killed someone's pet. Detective, I had no idea about the dog. David never told me he had a dog. Mrs. Whitmore, you weren't supposed to be in his yard in the first place. Whether he had a dog, a cat, or a collection of rare butterflies is irrelevant. The detective turned another page. November 8, 2023, suspect gained access to pool area using unknown method, used complainant's outdoor shower, consumed food and beverages from complainant's refrigerator. I was just trying to rinse the chlorine off. And I only had a few crackers. December 20, 2023, suspect hosted an authorized party in complainant's pool area involving 8 individuals. When confronted, suspect became verbally abusive and threatened complainant with social retaliation. Karen's cheeks burned. I never threatened him. Detective Rodriguez pulled out another document. According to Mr. Chen's statement, your exact words were, "You need to be very careful, David. I have a lot of friends in this neighborhood, and they are all starting to think you're a little unstable." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Karen had said them, she remembered the moment clearly, but hearing them read back in a police station, they sounded far more sinister than she'd intended. That wasn't a threat, she said weakly. I was just trying to give him perspective. By threatening his reputation and social standing. By helping him understand how his behavior was being perceived. Detective Rodriguez closed the folder. Mrs. Whitmore, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've seen every kind of neighbor dispute you can imagine. Property lines, noise complaints, tree branches, dog waste, all of it. But what I'm looking at here isn't a dispute. It's a sustained campaign of harassment and criminal trespass. That's not fair. David never tried to compromise or find a middle ground. He just said no to everything. Mrs. Whitmore, it's his pool. He doesn't have to compromise about who uses his private property. The simple truth of that statement hit Karen like cold water. In her mind, she'd been fighting for fairness, for neighborhood harmony, for the principle that neighbors should share resources. But stripped of her justifications and rationalizations, the detective was right. It was David's pool. Full stop. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That depends on several factors. Mr. Chen is pressing charges, which means this goes to the district attorney's office. Given the pattern of escalation and the fact that you used lock-picking tools, they'll probably file felony charges. Felony? Karen's voice cracked. For using a swimming pool. For breaking and entering with burglary tools, Mrs. Whitmore. The swimming pool is irrelevant, you committed a felony when you picked that lock. Karen's world tilted sideways. Felony charges. Criminal record. This wasn't supposed to happen to people like her. She was respectable. She was on the HOA board. She volunteered at the church fundraisers. Detective, please. There has to be some way to resolve this. I'll pay for any damages, apologize to David, sign whatever agreement you want. I can't have a criminal record. Detective Rodriguez's expression softened slightly. Mrs. Whitmore, that's not my decision to make. But I will tell you this, the DA's office looks at the totality of the situation when deciding how to prosecute. If Mr. Chen were willing to work out some kind of restorative justice agreement, that might change things. He'd do that. I have no idea. From what I can see in this file, you've put that man through 18 months of hell. If I were him, I'd want to see you face the full consequences too. Karen closed her eyes, trying to process the magnitude of her situation. Can I call my husband now? Of course. Detective Rodriguez led her to a phone in a small room that smelled like disinfectant and despair. Karen's hands shook as she dialed Brad's cell phone. It rang 4 times before his groggy voice answered. Hello. Brad, it's me. I'm at the police station. Silence. Then what? I've been arrested. I need you to come get me and probably call a lawyer. Arrested? For what? Karen, where are you? I thought you were asleep. The questions came in a rush, and Karen realized she was going to have to explain not just tonight's events, but months of deception. Brad had no idea about her midnight swims, her ongoing war with David, or the escalating criminal behavior she'd been hiding from him. It's complicated, she said. Just please come. I'm at Riverside Police Department downtown. Karen, you're scaring me. Arrested for what? Breaking and entering, she whispered. The silence stretched so long that Karen wondered if the call had dropped. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Brad said finally, his voice flat and unrecognizable. Karen hung up and returned to Detective Rodriguez, who was waiting with more paperwork. Your husband's coming. Yes. Good. In the meantime, I need to ask you some questions about tonight's events. You have the right to remain silent, and you have the right to an attorney. Anything you say can be used against you in court. As Detective Rodriguez read her Miranda rights, Karen felt the last of her illusions crumble. This was really happening. She was really here, in a police station, being read her rights like a common criminal. 20 minutes later, Brad burst through the doors of the police station looking like he'd aged 10 years in the space of a phone call. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, he'd thrown on clothes that didn't match, and his face wore an expression of bewildered devastation that made Karen's heart ache. Where is she? He demanded of the desk sergeant. Brad. Karen called out from across the room. He turned toward her voice, and the look on his face when he saw her, wet-haired, in a tank top and shorts, sitting in a police station at 5 a.m., was one she'd never forget. Shock, disappointment, and something that might have been recognition, as if he was finally seeing who she really was. Jesus Christ, Karen. What did you do? She tried to explain, but the words came out jumbled and defensive. The pull, the lock, David's unreasonableness, the trap he'd set for her. Brad listened in growing silence, his expression shifting from concern to confusion to something approaching horror. You've been breaking into David's yard for months? He asked when she finished. Karen, that's insane. I wasn't breaking in. I was just using the pull. With lockpicks. I only bought those after he changed the locks. Brad stared at her as if she were a stranger. Do you hear yourself right? Now? Do you understand what you're saying? I'm saying that David Chen has been completely unreasonable about this whole situation. Karen, it's his pull. The same words Detective Rodriguez had used, delivered with the Sam. Karen woke up at 2:17 p.m. to the sound of her doorbell ringing incessantly. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot what had happened. Then the events of the night crashed back over her like a tsunami, the arrest, the charges, Brad's horrified silence during their brief, brutal conversation before he'd left for work without saying goodbye. The doorbell rang again, followed by aggressive knocking. Karen. Open up. We need to talk. Margaret Chen's voice, shrill, furious, and carrying clearly through the front door. Karen's blood turned to ice. Margaret was David's sister-in-law, a prominent family law attorney who lived 3 streets over and had never spoken to Karen beyond polite neighborhood pleasantries. Karen crept to the living room window and peered through the blinds. Margaret stood on the front porch, but she wasn't alone. Behind her were at least a dozen neighbors, including several members of the HOA board. Their faces ranged from curious to outright hostile. I know you're in there, Karen, Margaret called out. The whole neighborhood knows what you did last night. Karen's phone buzzed with notifications. Text messages, missed calls, social media alerts, dozens of them. She scrolled through with growing horror. OMG, is it true you got arrested for breaking into David's house? Heard you've been stalking your neighbor for months. Is this why you missed the last 3 HOA meetings? My cousin works dispatch at RPD, says you had lockpicks. What is wrong with you? The Maple Grove Facebook group is going insane. You need to see this. With trembling fingers, Karen opened Facebook and navigated to the Maple Grove Neighborhood Watch Group, a community page she'd helped create and had been an active moderator of for 2 years. The latest post, shared 6 hours ago by Jennifer Walsh, had over 200 comments. Breaking, HOA President Karen Whitmore arrested for breaking into neighbor's property with burglary tools. Police reports show 18 months of harassment and criminal trespassing. This woman has been in charge of our neighborhood safety while committing felonies. Demand her immediate resignation. The comments were a feeding frenzy of neighborhood gossip, moral outrage, and social media justice. I knew something was off about her. Remember how nasty she got about the Thompson's fence height? She came to my door last month inspecting my garden. Now I wonder what else she was really doing. My Ring doorbell caught her walking around people's backyards at night. I thought she was just being thorough about HOA violations, but this explains everything. Brad must be mortified. Poor guy, married to a literal criminal. She needs to be removed from the HOA board immediately. Who knows what other illegal stuff she's been doing? Karen scrolled through comment after comment, watching her reputation disintegrate in real time. Neighbors she'd known for years, people she'd worked with on community projects, friends she'd hosted at barbecues, all of them turning on her with vicious efficiency. The doorbell rang again. Karen, this is ridiculous, Margaret's voice carried a lawyer's impatience now. Come out here and face what you've done, or I'm calling the police to do a wellness check. Karen knew Margaret wasn't bluffing. With shaking hands, she ran a brush through her hair and threw on a robe over her pajamas. The faces staring back at her when she opened the door were a gauntlet of judgment and barely contained fury. There she is, Margaret said with acid sweetness. The woman who's been terrorizing my brother-in-law for over a year. Margaret, I can explain. Margaret's voice rose to a prosecutorial volume. Explain how you spent 18 months breaking into someone's property. Explain how you threatened David's reputation when he tried to stop you. Explain how you nearly killed his dog. A collective gasp went up from the assembled neighbors. Karen realized that the dog incident, something she'd dismissed as minor, was hitting the community like a bombshell. The dog is fine, Karen said desperately. You never meant to get caught, interrupted Bob Patterson, the HOA treasurer. Karen, we've been getting calls all morning. Reporters, lawyers, concerned residents. The HOA's liability. Insurance wants to know if we've been covering criminal activity. Reporters. Karen's voice cracked. Jennifer Walsh stepped forward, her phone already recording. Channel 7 is running a story tonight about HOA president's crime spree. They interviewed David this morning. Karen's knees nearly buckled. Television. News. This was going beyond neighborhood gossip into public humiliation on a scale she'd never imagined. The board met this morning, Bob continued. Emergency session. We are calling for your immediate resignation from all HOA positions. You can't do that. Karen protested. I haven't been convicted of anything. Actually, we can, Margaret said with professional satisfaction. The HOA bylaws include a morality clause. Criminal charges involving dishonesty or harassment are grounds for immediate removal. Plus, added Carol Hernandez, the HOA secretary, we've been reviewing your recent actions in light of current events. The violations you've been writing, the property inspections, the late-night security patrols, it all looks very different now. Karen felt the world tilting sideways. What are you talking about? 3 weeks ago, you wrote the Patel's a violation for unauthorized outdoor furniture, Carol said, consulting her phone. But you took pictures of their backyard from inside their property. How did you get those photos, Karen? The question hung in the air like a sword. Karen had climbed their fence to get a better angle on the patio furniture she deemed non-compliant, but she'd never thought of it as trespassing. It was HOA business. It was her job to enforce community standards. And the Johnsons, Bob added. You cited them for an improperly stored garbage can, but the can was behind their house. Completely invisible from the street. Were you trespassing? On their property too? Karen's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. In her mind, she'd been a dedicated community leader, ensuring that Maple Grove maintained its high standards. But viewed through the lens of her arrest, every one of her actions looked sinister and criminal. Oh my God, whispered Jenny Martinez from the back of the crowd. She's been breaking into all our yards. I was enforcing HOA regulations. Karen finally managed. I was protecting our property values. By committing crimes. Margaret snapped. Karen, do you understand that everything you've done as HOA president is now legally questionable? Every violation, every fine, every decision, all of it could be challenged in court because it was made by someone engaging in criminal behavior. The implications crashed over Karen like successive waves. Legal challenges. Lawsuits. The HOA's insurance premiums. Property values actually declining because of the scandal she'd created. "We need your resignation letter by 5 p.m. today," Bob said. "And we are scheduling an emergency community meeting for tomorrow night to discuss next steps." Next steps? Karen repeated weakly. "Damage control," Carol said bluntly. "Legal review of every action you've taken as president. Possible lawsuits from residents whose property you've illegally accessed. Public relations management to prevent this from affecting our home values." Karen looked around at the faces surrounding her, neighbors she'd known for years, people whose lives she'd tried to improve through careful community management. Every single face showed the same expression: disgust, disappointment, and the desire to distance themselves from her as quickly as possible. "I'll have the resignation letter to you by 5, she said quietly. "Good," Margaret said. "And Karen, stay away from David. He's retained my firm to pursue civil charges in addition to the criminal case. If you so much as look at his property wrong, we'll have you back in jail within the hour." The crowd began to disperse, neighbors clustering together as they walked away, their voices carrying clearly in the afternoon air. "Can you believe we trusted her to oversee neighborhood security? I'm checking my Ring doorbell footage tonight. Who knows where else she's been? Poor Brad. He must have had no idea. Think she was stealing stuff too? I mean, if she'll break into pools." Karen closed the door and slumped against it, her legs finally giving out. The resignation letter. The community meeting. The legal bills. The criminal charges. The divorce that Brad would inevitably file once the full scope of her behavior became public. Her phone buzzed with another text, this one from her sister. "In Portland, Karen, just saw the news online." What the hell is going on? Online. The story had gone beyond local news. Karen frantically Googled her own name and watched her world explode across the internet. HOA president arrested for elaborate pool break-in scheme, neighborhood watch leader charged with 18-month harassment campaign, lockpicking Karen, when community leaders go rogue. Each headline was accompanied by her mugshot, hair stringy, makeup smeared, wearing a tank top that looked increasingly inappropriate in professional lighting. The image that would define her for the rest of her life. Karen scrolled through article after article, watching her story morph from simple trespassing into a cautionary tale about suburban entitlement and unchecked power. Comment sections filled with strangers dissecting her psychology, making jokes about pool pirates and neighborhood narcissists. One article included quotes from David's interview that morning, his voice calm and reasonable as he described 18 months of escalating harassment. "I just wanted to enjoy my pool in peace. I never imagined that asking someone to respect Bassie